Okay. Yeah.
I'm on now. Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday, January 17th agenda session. If I could have a motion on the minutes, please. Minutes have been motioned for approval. They will stand without objection. Thank you, everyone. Getting a little bit of a late start. We've been pushing it hard this afternoon with a work session starting at 1 p.m. I want to thank council for some great conversation for the last few hours. And I think we've hammered out and asked a lot of pertinent questions to issues that we have on our agenda. Ordinances under final reading this evening, planning items. If there's are no questions, I will watch the board for your lights for items on final reading. Seeing none. Under Public Works, we have an item, ordinances moving into first reading. We do have an item under planning, item Karen, case 0213, which is on for first reading. Will you bring us up to date on that one, please?
Yes, we had the applicant request that this case be withdrawn. There was quite a bit of opposition. I think he was responding to that. So this does come with a request to withdraw.
Okay, thank you. And that is in District 4, if council will note. Resolutions, economic development, 2 items in District 4. I have no questions there. Under early learning, several appointments to, looks like North Chattanooga and Hickson are covered with our Community Advisory Committee. several appointments this evening. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to economic development, we've got a duplicate resolution on our 2-week agenda for the SBA structures. It's economic development, item B, so we know we've got a duplicate.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. That is a clerical error that the city attorney will address. That's the District 4 towers.
Yes.
That's repeated, but we caught that this morning, so
Okay,
thank
thanks.
you. Yeah, so if it's without objection from council, I would like to ask for that item to be removed on the proposed agenda because it is.
On the 2-week, okay.
Yes, yeah, that is a duplicate, so we've stated that in an open meeting. Thank you, and thank you for bringing that up, Councilwoman. Council, if you will, take a look at your purchases for this evening. And hit your light if you have any questions. I know these were sent last week for review. We do have an RFP request that was deferred from last week. And I believe someone from the administration may make a request, judging from what I heard in our meeting, to move that ahead one more week due to council comments and questions and concerns. Am I, all right, I'm getting a head shake, then we will see what happens at 6 on that. We have a sole purchase to report, and we have no emergency purchases. Is that correct? Very good. Future considerations. If you would, take a look at those and hit your light. Dr. Burrs, you have the floor, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Let me go to the end one first. Number 14, Office of Community Health Family Justice Center. We had requested that be the due date for, I spoke with you about that, Mr. Chair, the due date for the application to be in is the 31st. So I'd ask that be moved up a week.
And that is item number 14.
14.
Item L.
14.
Yes, ma'am. It's,
And that probably just didn't get communicated.
I was gonna say, I do remember sending an email with addressing that to be moved. So let's talk about that.
Well, can we
Because-
move it up?
Yeah, we need to move it up
29th?
because
I
the
mean,
date
that's-
is, yeah. So, Mr. Attorney, we have this item here.
Yes.
I'd like to talk about that and put into, actually move that
To the 23rd.
to the 23rd.
Okay.
Okay, without objection from council. Okay, stated?
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And
Dr.
then
Burrs.
my second one is the annexation,
Yes, ma'am.
Office of the City Attorney. That's number 9.
Yes, ma'am.
Talk a little bit about that, please.
Okay. This is a portion of a apartment complex that is being constructed, most of which is in the city of Chattanooga. There is a small portion that is outside in the county currently, and the owner of that property is requested to come in by a petition request into the city of Chattanooga. It's
Okay,
in the
it's-
city's growth boundary, should not be any additional requirements for services on that area other than what we already provide.
Okay, it's in my district, and that had a lot of discussion. So just wanted to clarify. I mean, I'm fine with it. I
Yes.
just wanted to clarify. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Bird, in our agenda session, if you would take a quick look at next week's proposed agenda, and take a look for that item, if you would, please, and let's make sure. That would be our proposed agenda. Had a busy-
I'm still sorting papers here. All right.
That's me, so I'm sorry. It never fails on a Tuesday. Family Justice Center is listed, Madam,
As
under
F.
item F.
Okay, that's great. It was, the two didn't jive, and I just wanted to make sure. That's super. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Okay. Have we had an opportunity to continue looking at our January 24th agenda? And yes, thank you, Councilwoman Hill again. The item B was made note of. Public Works, item I. Mr. Attorney, are we going to have we made the adjustment, the resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Public Works next needs to be Department of Wastewater? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And Maria in our office will make that one change. We'll
Okay.
order that to be prepared.
Okay, so I am requesting that.
We will do it.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Since we've made a new department, that will actually fall in there. And for those of you who may have, and I had the same question about this, this is, we want to talk about this, Mark, a little bit. This is paving. That's actually under the wastewater and not in our paving budget under Public Works. That's why it may be a little confusing.
Sure, thank you.
Yep.
This contract is basically just to help restore right-of-way when we go in and excavate for repairs. So it might be curbs, sidewalk, driveway aprons, things like that, pavement. That's really what it's for. And we use it in all districts around the city whenever we're doing a repair that requires, excavation.
This includes sidewalks and roads, asphalt
Yeah.
and concrete.
Whatever we would get into in the right-of-way, yeah.
Okay, if you'll hang on I have a couple of questions. Councilwoman Coonrod, I see your light now.
Thank you, Chair Miles. I didn't have any questions about that. I just wanted to,
You go right ahead. I've been moving rather quickly with today's flurry of activity.
yeah, on 7, on the resolutions, the council office, A, I was present last Tuesday, but I would like to be added on as a co-sponsor.
Well, absolutely. We'd be happy to do that. Thank you for
Thank you.
joining.
Mhm.
Mr. Attorney, is that okay?
That'll be fine.
Well, that'll make, I think, an
whole-
even 9.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, thank you,
Mhm.
Councilwoman.
That's the first.
Councilwoman Hill, I see your light.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like a little bit more information on item H under Parks and Outdoors. It's related to, it's a resolution that says we're going to establish some new criteria, processes, et cetera, for the PACE program within our Parks Department. And I wondered when we can expect to see what that new criteria will be. Will that come back across our agenda?
I'm looking with a bated breath for someone from the administration
Looks like
to
Brooke
address
is
that.
gone.
Normally, that would be Mr. Martin.
I don't think he's here. We can definitely get you that information before next week. And we can also, if it is y'all's pleasure, we can do a presentation where Scott and his team can come in and present on the changes.
So the
next week.
changes so the document within the links just says it's a resolution, which led me to believe we were going to authorize you to then decide what changes you want to make. But it sounds like what you're saying is the new criteria have been determined.
I believe that there have been a couple of tweaks that are specifically being proposed.
Okay, yeah, if you could send us some more information
Sure.
about that before next week, that would be great. Thank you
Be
very
great.
much.
And Brooke, if it's okay, I wouldn't mind having Mr. Martin on deck to maybe address those as well.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Council. Any other comments or questions regarding our January 24th proposed agenda, business agenda? Vice Chair, do I see your light? You have the floor, ma'am?
Yes, I did want to, have we moved to department reports?
We will, we're almost there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll let you get there.
Quick second as I shuffle this paperwork. Okay, well, under department report for today, I have none.
Right. And I had a request, on last Tuesday, we had a lot of comments from, individuals that work in public works, specifically solid waste. I was able to get with Ryan, who has been great about giving information regarding their issues. So I'm requesting a departmental report to be placed on the agenda for January 31st to go over some of the issues and concerns that were addressed during that meeting and what the administration is currently doing to remedy those solutions.
Okay, real quick, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Parks and Public Works Committee is scheduled for the 21st. It is also scheduled for February the 7th. Yes, there it is. February the 7th. I'm happy to call a special Parks and Public Works meeting if you'd like, but I just want to present that option to you.
Just to get it resolved quicker, if we can get it, the sooner we can get it on the agenda, the sooner we can get, I guess people can get educated on what is going on and what are the remedies, because they were pressing issues with our city employees.
Understood. So on the 31st, we have a Public Safety Committee, and there's been a request to also hold a specially called Parks and Public Works Committee. Any objection from council on that? We'll go ahead and put that, Madam Clerk. You'll add that to our agenda session on the 31st.
It works. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I
Madam
appreciate
Chair.
it.
All right, our Madam Vice Chair. That concludes department reports. We will now move into committees if no one has any other comments or questions for our agenda session. Okay. Yes. Oh, Councilwoman.
Before we get into that, thank you.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, Bay Area isn't in District 8 and District 9. However, I've had a lot of people to call with concerns of the apartment complex. The city of Chattanooga, we did give them a pilot. So Jermaine, as you heard, and I spoke to Jermaine earlier, but I want to request that Bay Area, if they could come give us an update on where they are in renovating that property. A lot of constituents are complaining about sewage backup in their apartments. So a lot of them are being displaced. I've shared concerns about us giving people pilots in our communities, and this ends up being the result. They're not giving us the work that they say that they are doing. So are you able to get them to come to a public meeting to address concerns?
I believe we can do it, and I also think that we'll need to follow up with codes enforcement to make sure that they have a chance to come out to look at the situation at the apartment complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And Chair, also, and it's my last thing, is that we've all been seeing a lot of things. They're talking about more killings by homicides and different things in our community. And I know we're having a public safety committee report, but I'd like to also hear from our police department about what are the steps or things that they're doing to kind of reduce that. I'm kind of getting tired of hearing, oh, well, it's not, it's reduced from the numbers of last year, or it's not as high as the previous years. That's missing the whole point when we still have these things that's happening in our community. And we no longer can say, oh, it's in this particular community, because it's happening all over the city of Chattanooga. And, we have cameras in place that still aren't able to capture, people that are committing these type crimes. So I'm even more concerned. And, if they're not working, then I want the cameras removed out of my communities if it's not serving a greater purpose of what we're saying we're using the cameras for. But if we can get a report from the police department to really, talk about.
So Councilwoman, I see a Public Safety Committee scheduled for the 31st. And if you'll allow me to defer to the chair of that committee, are you okay with adding that into your committee, sir? Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just if we could,
And the chief of police is here. I don't know if you saw her in the back.
yeah, but that's fine. But I still want to appropriately address you, how we talk about it. But
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. We'll get that in there for you. Any other questions or comments before we move into legislative committee? In your packet, you'll see an attorney-client meeting requested. I have confirmed with the city attorney, we do not need that today. So thank you very much. I know I have a sigh of relief from several of us. So Chairman Smith of the Legislative Committee, you have the floor. We'll call to order the Legislative Committee to have a motion on the minutes. A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed is nay. Thank you very much. We have two items business to go over in Legislative Committee. One is a proposed ordinance for the city election cycle, and another is over STVR. So we will go to the first one, which is the city election cycle. And Kiana, I believe you brought that out for the packets. Is that correct? All right, so everybody should have that one in their packets. Am I right, Councilwoman Coonrod, that this is being brought forth by you?
Yes.
Well, I would like to turn that over to you then, if that is all right.
Thank you, Chair. So this has been, in circulation for a while and talks about it, and now we're here. So I would like, and part of the legislation in the why is that we could move our election cycle to the, for us, I would say, in cycle for 28. And on that cycle, if we chose to, perhaps, if the council decided to vote for it and then the constituents would approve it to vote for it on the ballot, it will put us on an election cycle that's not right after the presidential election. That August cycle will be not a congested cycle. Our election will still be nonpartisan as the other municipalities are nonpartisan. And looking at the results and the data, what I've seen is that in our city council elections, like our voters are lessly coming out than in our state elections. We saw an increase in our voters coming out in 21 when we ran this last time, and I honestly think that's because the amount of people that was running for mayor. We've never had that many people to run on that ballot, so everybody was bringing out people who hadn't voted in a while. They registered new voters that came out. So this next term, it may not look like that if we don't have that many. And it's the first that I've ever been able to vote that we've had a large amount of Black people seeking to become mayor that brought out a large population of Black people across the city as well. It'll help reduce the voter fatigue. As I say, we coming off a presidential election. Before that presidential election is the election in August. And right after that, that's when city council code. Folks are tired, right? We're tired. We no longer can say, oh, well, Black people aren't coming out. All types of people aren't coming out. All types of people aren't coming out. And I think this will help with that if we're just placed on an election cycle with others. It'll save us money. It may not be millions of dollars, but the amount that we can capture, we can use those funds for programming. We can use it, add it into our paving budget. We can put it in our housing fund. We can put it, to add additional code enforcement officers. We can use that money for different things. So no one submitted to me any additional questions or concerns. No one sent anything to fill. Also, it talks about our term limits on here as well. So it's a couple of things in here. So the term limits here, I'm not for sure if the mayor need to be here for 4 terms, or we could discuss it, or if anybody is interested in term limits, and then the staggered terms. But it all will be contingent on if we say, hey, this is something we want to move forward with to be placed on the ballot, and the ultimate decision will be from our constituents.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilwoman Coonrod, I could support getting on a election cycle that coincides with a county election, and I would prefer an election cycle that begins in 2028. I think that would put us on the ballot that is not as crowded as the ballot would be in 26, if I'm correct. Our county commissioner might be able to answer that question a little better. One thing, I guess, I'm not necessarily in favor of staggered terms. Whenever I was on the school, I mean, that to me, and it was more of a hindrance than a help. And I never did really appreciate the staggered terms. as far as the term limits, and I understand we have a term limit now for the city mayor, but I've always felt like the voting public determined term limits. And sometimes they gave you a 1-year term or, one term limit. Sometimes it was 2 or 3, but I guess I've always felt like that was taking a little bit of the voting public's freedom away by placing a mandatory term limit on a representative that they like. And they'll let you know right quick if they don't like a representative. So I could support the getting on, and I think that also give the council that runs in 2025 a heads up that they would be running for somewhat less than a 4-year term by it being in the cycle of 2028. So I could support that, but term limits and staggered terms, that would obviously, if we went to a cycle that coincided with the county, that would put somebody having to run in that, what I'll call the big ballot. And I certainly wouldn't want to have to fight that battle. But so I think it would be better maybe just to leave everybody in that same voting block. Mr. Chair, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I've shared my opinion on this back in August when Councilwoman Coonrod initially brought the idea to this body. I am not in support of changing our elections to coincide with the election cycle. And the reason why is because nonpartisan elections and elected bodies like ours are very rare, and I think they're very important. While moving our city elections to follow county state cycles would save a small amount of money in the grand scheme of our budget, I believe that the city would lose much more than we would gain. Reality is that county, state, and national elections are partisan. And as such, the rhetoric that surrounds these elections is largely party platform based, even if it's not a presidential election cycle. That means that those elections are aimed at moving primary voters who typically fall on the ideological ends of the spectrum to the polls. And you'll notice that these elections struggle to focus on new ideas and solutions, favoring instead partisan lightning rods. Our city elections create their own separate conversation away from the noise of partisan blather. Candidates are motivated to work just as diligently to earn votes in the cycle that we have set up, and they have an opportunity to do so based on their ideas, record, relationships, and work ethic, rather than a binary RD proposition. Having served in the county system, I can attest to the reality that partisanship has a palpable effect on how work gets done or not done. And it's only natural that savvy, dedicated candidates will adapt to whatever system of election is established. By holding our elections separate, we reinforce our nonpartisan commitment. If we choose to align with the partisan structure, we can expect results not unlike County Commission, a body that struggles to find consensus on important, seemingly nonpartisan issues, such as wastewater treatment, zoning, facilities, etc. The idea of staggering the elections is one that has not been in the conversation since Councilwoman Coonrod brought that in August. So I'd like to add, I found on school board, there was a really interesting disparity set up by that. On the face of it, it's an interesting idea to be able to retain some institutional knowledge in the structure of staggering. However, what I noticed is that there will always be seats that will be running at the same time as the county commission seats. So for example, I can speak from District 6 in County Commission and School Board. District 6 County Commission and School Board is reelected every time at the same time, whereas District 1 County Commission and School Board run at different times. And I don't think that that creates a fairness for all the people who are running. So if we are going to be staggering, I'd want us to be thinking about how that overlays so that if someone wants to pursue another seat, that they have the same foundation as somebody else that is running from another district. And I am very open to hearing the conversation about term limits. I don't have a strong opinion on that at this point, and this discussion will help me form one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further comments or questions? All right, seeing none, at this point in legislative committee, when we do have an ordinance or a resolution being presented, the next step is to ask either for consensus to move it forward onto the agenda, or at the very least have two council members willing to sponsor the legislation to put it forward. And I've got another light. Hold on just a moment. Councilman Henderson.
Well, I guess before we decide whether we want to move it forward, which I would have no objection to moving it forward. As I stated earlier, I would support an election cycle that would coincide with 2028, not being staggered. I didn't know if the sponsor of the bill would want to go back and tweak it or address it, or if this is the legislation that she wants to put forward. I'm certainly amenable to moving forward with that, although I wouldn't be able to support it in its current form.
That would be my next question I was about to come up with, but thank you for putting that out there. But before that, I do have another light, so I will hold on mine. Chairman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be honest and say I really have not dove as deep into this particular, given that we still have some time for this. And I would like to ask the sponsor if this is a do or die right now, or if there's conversation that needs to happen. Are you ready to, this is it, or is there further conversation? Because I do have concerns about staggered terms, the term limits, interesting conversation. I don't feel like we've talked about that enough. And I do have some concern about losing our identity as nonpartisan. It's one of the things that, honestly, since day one of holding this office, I've held the most dear to my heart is when people ask me, and I say, when I come into this room and I come to this building to conduct business, I am a Chattanoogan, and the only letter after my name is a C, capital C. And I don't want to get lost in that shuffle. And that gives me great pause and great concern. And not to say that conversation cannot happen or that more conversation should happen. But as it stands right now, I would not be supporting this, and just want to make that claim openly, and to ask if this was a do or die at this moment for this legislation. So thank you, Chair.
Councilman Hester.
I've also had a chance to dive into this. I at least want to talk to the folks in my district regarding this. I say very concerned about crowded elections. I know a lot of folks who are probably looking at us out there in TV land. They're very concerned about that too, these crowded elections. At least want to speak to the folks in my district before we go forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So to follow up, we can move this legislation forward in its current form if the sponsor so chooses, as long as there is somebody to co-sponsor it. However, due to some of the questions that are asked, Councilwoman Coonrod, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond as to whether or not you would like to discuss this further and move it forward, ma'am.
This legislation, everybody received this in a time that over a month to look at it, to review. And I think it's a slap in the face to say that you didn't even take the time to even look at it. No, it's not something that's like do or die that need to be done right now. But we need to start considering other things that we've done that we've made it urgent, that it don't take effect until 3 years from now. But we pushed it through. We didn't go to our constituents to ask questions. Some that came up and we still moved forward without even doing it. But again, I'm gonna leave that in last year. So my concern, and I hear your concerns, and this doesn't move us to a partisan election. We'll still be nonpartisan. All the other municipalities, they're, outside of the county, they're nonpartisan elections. So it's not about us saying that you're a Republican or a Democrat, because I don't care nothing about that. When we all got elected, we serving to make the best decision for the city of Chattanooga. Not because we're Republicans, not because we're Democrats, not because we're independents, but for the betterment of our city of Chattanooga. So because I am always willing to work with my colleagues, so yes, we could, further the discussion, tweak it a little bit. Please, again, I'm asking if whatever concerns that you have, you can email Phil and I. If you need to have public comment sessions with your constituents, because their voice is gonna matter after what we decide to do. If it goes through, they have to vote on it. So if we said, yes, we wanna move forward, our constituents, they can very well say, no, we don't want it. So Ken, I'm willing to do that this time, but I would appreciate the same grace that we extend to everybody else, that you all start to extend that to me too when I'm presenting legislation. At least take the time to read it so we can be prepared when we get ready to discuss it in legislation. We had too much time to review it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I've got one right. Chairman?
Yes, thank you. I want to make clear, because I feel like some words were put into my mouth. I did not ignore this legislation. What I said was I have not dove deep into it over the past month. And what that means, and let me remind you, when I introduced the steep slope legislation, which took a year and a half of diving into it, conversation with this council, working in and out of the community, the professional community, the landscape, the developers. I really did my homework on that. This has incredible consequences that I would like to spend the time on. And that is what I'm saying. 1 month does not give me enough time to do the diligence that I promised my district that I would do in asking them for a monumental change in how we conduct our elections. This system was set up with a turn of our government formation at a certain time in history. And I would like to have the opportunity to hear about that, understand why. And it may be that it's a good idea. It may be time for this. I'm not saying that. What I'm trying to say is just because it's been out there for a month in the paperwork doesn't mean I haven't looked at it. And I want to make sure that's clear. Legislation takes time. Just because an idea comes forward doesn't mean, well, you've had 2 weeks to look at it, let's get it done. These things take time, and I've done that. I've walked that path for nearly a year and a half. And all I'm asking for is the consideration and conversation to listen to the aspects that could be involved in this and the unintended consequences and the good and the bad. That's all I'm asking for. I did not ignore this. I want to make sure that's clear for the record. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry. Councilwoman, I'm sorry, I hit the button twice here and knocked you off. You want to hit your light again? Okay.
Aaron, and we agreed to, hey, give you some time to dive into it. But I do want to bring it up to your attention is that when we got presented, and I'm bringing it back up, the rezoning, the redistricting, we had less time to look at it and say, this is what we done, something that's going to affect our communities. And not just that, it's other stuff that come before us that can affect us, that we move forward, and we're not just, oh, well, we're going to need a little more time. It is important. And I want you to be able to dive into it and do all of that. That's why I'm saying, yes, let's do that. I'm agreeing to do that. But when I ask for that same thing, I want to make sure that that opportunity is given to me as well. Thank you, Chair.
All right, so moving forward, Mr. Chair, I may direct this question to you. we do need to bring this back up, whether or not that's in legislative committee or maybe strategic planning. I'll leave it up to you, sir, to decide which one of those is most appropriate. As far as the timeline, I think we owe Councilwoman Coonrod, who's introducing this, a realistic timeline when we're all willing to spend the time to look this over, be 30 days, whatever that may be, and set that date. Then, sir, it's up to you whether you'd like to hear this in strategic, where we can really hammer it out, or back in this committee where we typically look at something that's a little more formal and ready to move forward to the agenda.
Time frame. Would you rather see this in strategic planning? Would you like to see this back in this form?
I'd like to have it back on the section, and we can do 30 days. I think that's a good time.
Is that real?
Would you like to see that in strategic planning, Councilwoman, or in 330?
30. All right, so in 1 month, Kiana, if you would make sure to make a note, what you can do legislative committee meeting in that amount of time. And council members, in that amount of time, in the next 30 days, if you do have questions or concerns beyond what was discussed here, please email those to our city attorney so we can collect those and get back to the sponsor to see what we want to do for moving. All right. Thank you. No further lights on this item. We will move forward to our STBR ordinance. I believe everybody has received a couple versions of this. The one marked redlined, I believe, is the latest version. Councilman Henderson, I believe you are the sponsor here, sir. I am turning it over to you now.
Well, speaking of how long it takes to get something passed, this has been a while. There was a little bit of confusion, I think, earlier this morning when something was sent out that wasn't quite ready, but you do have a red line version with some of the comments that were made last week at our work session. And I'll just go over a few of those. One, it was presented, and by the way, I appreciate Councilwoman Hill presenting her suggestions in written. Made it easier to adapt. But one of the things that we did is, instead of referring to an R3 or an R4, is I've labeled residential multi-structure attached units. The version that was sent out earlier this morning that I asked the city attorney to tweak, they had within the city, and I felt like that might create some confusion. So we went back and just put within the short-term vacation rental district. So basically what you have is a 5% cap on multi-structure units with a minimum of 1. And then in the residential single structured detached, you have, well, the buffer stays the same, 500 feet. There was some talk about the need to, I guess, to extend the moratorium just a little bit further. So from 30 days, I went to 45 days. And council, if you kind of do the math, by the time this gets on the 2-week agenda, it takes 2 readings to pass. It takes another 2 weeks to become effective. And then you give it 45 days. That puts it at the end of the first week in April. And I think we heard last week that we could have a administrative hearing on by March. So this puts it at the end of the first full week in April by doing 45 days. And then I did amend or include some of the fee structure changes that included some of the money going to affordable housing. So on the absentee initial fee, I've got a $750 initial fee with an additional $250 designated to the City Affordable Housing Fund, and then the transfer fee of $1,000 with the entire amount going to the City Affordable Housing Fund. And I think that was the bulk, at least, of what we discussed last week and some changes that the council would like to see, which, as the sponsor of this legislation, I was good with. One of the things that I did not include, and I'll point that out, was putting a portion of the renewal fee under the absentees toward the city's affordable housing. The reason I did that, being in business, an initial fee or an upfront fee, a one-time fee, has never been a problem for me. I include that in the startup of whatever I'm doing. It's always those reoccurring fees that sort of start eating into your overhead and eventually into your profit. So for those reasons, that's the reason I left out placing an additional fee on the renewals. Everything else stayed as it was in the ordinance. So you do have a red line version that points out the differences that was presented from last week. And then I also have just a clean version of the ordinance as well. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions. And I think Mr. Anderson was also going to give us a little bit of update maybe of kind of where we were in the on the enforcement side of it, as far as letters going out. Had we begin to hear have we begin to hear any of the cases and where we were in that? So I don't know what order you want to take it, if the council wants to hear the update, or if we want to basically take the questions on the red line version.
Let's go around first. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. First, Councilman Henderson, thank you very much for hearing the ideas and concerns that I brought and incorporating so many of them into this new red line version. I appreciate it and feel like we're headed toward a good place. As I reflected on this version, I thought I've been thinking some more about the process that I think would be most effective at delivering a successful process for our neighborhoods. So what I'd like to see is us pass an ordinance that provides for enforcement, fee structure, and density, that addresses all three of those. Those are our primary challenges, in which the enforcement and fee structure would go into effect immediately so that we could shut down the illegal short-term vacation rental immediately using the enforcement mechanisms that this ordinance would provide, would allow for renewal fees for legal operators to go into effect so that we could begin covering the cost of our enforcement plans, and then allowing the moratorium to live out its life and end at the natural 6 months that we had already planned for. My thought being, as it has been, that we've got to get this enforcement piece done, and there's plenty of work to be done between now and that moratorium coming open, at which point also, whatever ends up in this ordinance, operators would be able to become aware of the rules as they stand. And the day that that moratorium goes, applications can open wide open again. So with that thought process of where we're headed, I picked back up the administration's proposed version that they had brought to us. And what I noticed is that there's a lot of useful detail in that version. Councilman Henderson's version focuses on sections 11-519 through 526, and also section 510. But the administration's version covers, it starts with 510 and goes through 517. And what I noticed when I've been studying that version is those versions, they cover definitions, minimum standards for short-term vacation rental, the application process, the certificate approval, revocation, transfer conditions, renewal fees and process, the requirements for a short-term vacation rental agent, which was something that was important to this body or to the committee that we heard a lot, was making sure we had someone who was responsible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's a section in the administration's version for that. And there's also a section related to failure to obtain certificate. What happens if applicant were denied? So what I'm seeing is both versions have really solid ideas, and I'm personally not ready to leave either one of those sets of ideas behind to the exclusion of the other. So I'm working on a casserole, as it were, to mash these two together to bring so that we have the definitions that clarifies the language, so that I feel like we have more solid legal standing and fewer questions without answers within the ordinance. So that said, handful of thoughts that I would love for us to explore in legislative committee today. The first is defining the authority of the short-term vacation rental appeals board. That shows up in Councilman Henderson's version and in the administration version, but also in but the administrative hearing officer's authority is addressed only in the administration's version. And given that both of those are key enforcement elements, I would like us all to have a really solid understanding of what we can expect from those groups, because my impression from our committee conversations and the focus groups within the community, both from neighborhoods and investors, was we have to have very clear rules about what's allowed, what's not allowed, and what happens when you break the rules. So I would like us to explore that some more. And then also, I would like some guidance from planning about the phrase residential multi-structure attached units and residential single structure detached. That's something that we worked out last week on the dais. And I wonder, does that then allow us to have, because that was our new way of saying single family and multifamily, but where does commercial fit in that? I just want to make sure we're covering our bases. So like, if we might be able to have some guidance on that either today or in the next week, that would be really useful. I am still committed to having some kind of affordable housing fund fee as part of a renewal, because the thought process with that is any housing unit that is taken out of our housing ecosystem is one where a Chattanoogan cannot live long-term. And so for as long as a unit is a short-term rental, it is taking a unit away. And that renews every time that unit stays a short-term rental. Also, just to inform my colleagues, I have had help from the city attorney and learned quite a bit about taxes. Interestingly, I believe it was in 2017 that the state legislature said that effectively absentee non-owner occupied short-term vacation rentals are to be assessed at 40%. So as a city, revenue has been left on the table since 2017. And so that's something that is just, I think, can just go into effect with the next budget. And there are some processes that the assessor of property will need us to be able to flag those properties and let them know that they are absentee rentals. And there is actually within state law, and this was terrific for the local investor who has a singular short-term vacation rental that is not their home. Within the tax law, there is a provision to essentially allow for a second home that can be rented as a short-term vacation rental at the residential tax rate assessment. So, so you could have your home and a quote vacation home that you stay at 14 days a year or 10% of the days that you rent it out. So there's a provision in that in the state tax law. So that was a lot for me. Casserole is what I'm looking for, bringing together the administration, Councilman Henderson's, so we make sure we've got all of our details in there. And then can we please figure out together administrative hearing officer and the appeals board? Thank you, that's all.
Councilwoman. Vice Chair Dotley.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman. First, thank you, Councilman Henderson, for doing so much work on this. We really appreciate it. I did want to echo some of the sentiments from Councilwoman Hill. The transfer fee, after review and talking to some of my constituents and reading some emails and feedback I got back, some of the there were issues with the transfer fee, because that is from, and just clarity for me, that's from if I owned a property and I decided to give it to my niece, and then she decided that she wanted to keep a short-term vacation rental. And so she will have to pay $1,000 fee to transfer. Is that
Well, it doesn't have to be
a family member?
family member.
Just if I sold it to somebody from business to business or things like that. Vacation, okay. All right, so that's, okay, so that's an issue, because then you will have people going sad, I'm buying this house just to give it to not that I would, but give it to Councilman Smith so he can just flip it and sell it. And he can flip it and sell it, and and it becomes, that in itself becomes a business. I think it becomes a bit more complex with the transfer. So it'd be great to just have that removed, and just, if the permit stays with the person that owned it or who applied for it, and if the house is sold or turned over, whatever the case is, they can come in and apply for an initial application and go through that same process for that. And in regards to the 45-day change, I do think we still need that tiered or phased in approach, because we do need to address enforcement capacity, making sure that we have all that in place before we do anything. We don't want it just to be because they're coming. As soon as it opens up, everybody's coming in, they're gonna put those applications in, and it's just gonna pile up and become an issue for administration. And then from that, of course, everything's always pours back over to us. So I think that we should have a phased in or tiered approach to it. I don't believe going past the 6-month deadline. If we don't have it by then, I don't know what we're doing at that point. But I do think there needs to be a tiered in or phased in approach to it. I like the idea of Councilwoman Hill stating that maybe we can pass legislation for the enforcement fees and density, so we can go ahead and at least get something going as part of that phased in tiered approach, and then coming back finally and opening and getting that data, and us, getting a report from administration, letting us know what's going on. And then from there, preparing to open back up, that I believe it's July 9th. I think that's the date, to open up on July the 9th. So that is what, those are my comments. And I would like a little bit more clarity on what happens in those commercial properties, those that UGC type mix use, because a lot of that is coming, and I'm sure a lot of people will be getting those condos to turn to short-term vacation rentals. So just looking at that and seeing, what's the definition, and how does that get into, how is that impacted? So those are a few items that I wanted to address, just the phased-in approach, and making sure that we have all our ducks in a row before we open up, and then there's a flood of people coming in and we're not prepared to receive them in any way, to be impactful and effective for our constituents. Thank you.
Chairman Ledford.
Thank you, sir. My question is regarding the transfer. I was reading over this, and I may have missed it, but does this transfer go, does this legislation imply that we're adding the transfer as a by right instead of?
No.
It does not. Okay. I know we had discussed that, and I'm not seeing it in bold print here, but if you want to.
Mr. Attorney, I'm not sure right off the top of my head. What I had asked is Mr. Attorney to do is make the transfer fee subject to the review. In other words, you would come before a review board, and they would determine whether that would be transferred. Now, if that's not clear, if that's, I thought I saw that. in
I'm a
there,
little,
but I can't
yeah, if you can help me out, that would
I
help.
can't pick it up. Where, just, Mr. Turner, do you remember Rob, where that is?
It's in section F.
Okay.
522.
But it doesn't specify how. It just says.
It just says the appeals board would consider any disputes over transfers that may occur between owners. If you want us to add specific procedures, that would be the place.
Okay, so I guess my question would be oriented, our intent is to, in this legislation, have this transfer and be assigned permanently to the property. That's a yes or no.
No, the intent is for the applicant for the transfer to go before the appeals board. And have the appeals board determine whether it is appropriate to transfer the permit.
Okay,
Now,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to get too much language about directing the appeals board how to determine, but
that was my next
I
question.
would expect them to base a lot of this on the legislation itself, that if you have two closer than 500 feet and they're applying for a transfer, they would not be granted the transfer. That everybody would come into compliance through that process.
So then my question back to the city attorney would be, does this board set the standards for the appeal board? As in the Board of Zoning Appeals, in which they have criteria for hardships that they use as a standard basis for making a determination?
This body can, but it's going to have to be an evolving decision made by that appeals board, because like we're talking about, if there are situations where other units move into play, then it may cancel someone's ability to be able to transfer out potentially in that regard, because you've got a moving set of players here as it goes along further. But yes, you can specify more the authority that you give. The board right now would have the authority to accept or approve an application, approve it with conditions, or deny an application if there's a transfer request made. And that's the only authority that you're giving them right now.
So
It
the
doesn't specify.
appeals board would decide that amongst themselves?
Yes, sir. And from there, that appeal board has to approve it in writing as their reason for approval or denial, and then the courts would actually enforce it from there.
Is there any state law that would dictate or direct those conditions upon which they would make that decision?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it would be for lack of a better phrase, how do we feel this morning?
No, sir. It would be, we're inventing a railroad here, and we've got to get it going, and we've got to get it somewhere.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
all right, that helps me. Thank you, Chair. Councilman.
Chair,
Councilman?
when we, much like when we started the citizens review, they had to come up with some policies and standards of their own. We didn't handcuff them or legislate to them, and that's kind of the thought that I had.
Okay.
Let a governing body kind of determine
The rules.
the review process, because they will be subject to law.
Yes.
When they, if something actually goes to change.
Okay. Good. But it's not by right. This
It would not
legislation
be-
is not a by
It would not
right.
be right, and that's what I was trying to make
Okay.
speak about, this becoming a business of its own. If I bought this as an investor, I'm taking a little bit of a risk that the review board will allow me to transfer that. There's no guarantee
Understood.
that transfer will be permitted. There's no guarantee of that. It's just a process in which there may be entirely appropriate places where a transfer is appropriate. So,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to create a path that would permit that.
Understood.
But if you've got a street that has three of them, three non-owner occupiers, and somebody goes to do a transfer, my thought process is they would take this ordinance and say, no, you're within 500 feet, we're not going to allow this. And so you would start having some attrition
Mm.
through the transfer until you at least got to a point that you had that buffer.
That's interesting.
Like a future compliance mechanism.
That's correct.
Okay.
Without just completely eliminating all.
Good.
Complicated brain you got.
Well,
Councilwoman Knoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in agreement with Councilwoman Hill. I love the idea of the casserole. In order for a casserole to be good, it has to have great ingredients.
Bacon.
And no bacon, no bacon, no devil's meat, no devil's meat at all. But you know, you need what would be a ingredient that would be not good for that casserole to make that casserole not be great would be those that are illegal. So those, once you get those taken care of, that's always been my thing. Take care of those that are illegal, and then you take it from there. Great, thank you. So meshing them together is, yeah. With that,
Extra bacon. I actually had a few questions, and a couple of them may be for the city attorney. This may be on purpose or not, syntactically anyways. Under 11.519C2, that particular sentence is the exact same as C4. I don't know if that was done on purpose or if there was a reason that they weren't just all kind of grouped together. And in addition, the last.
C2.
Here, this sentence is the exact same as this one.
One should be based on homestay and one should be absentee.
So we just may want to look at that because 3 says absentee as well. So I don't know if one of them is supposed to be both and the others are individual. The other item.
And obviously, number 4, if we're changing the references to R2, R3, and R4, we need to take those out.
Sure. The other thing, Mr. Attorney, to double check if you would, under C3, B, the second paragraph there is almost duplicate to the first paragraph, 4A. And 4A covers both types. So I don't know if that is just extra or needed to be removed.
Okay.
And then so that's just to double check, make sure we've got the language correct. And then my other question may be more for the sponsor, and I'm open for other feedback on, actually, I'm not open. I'm just putting this out there for thought. I've got a constituent in my district that has purchased property in District 1 to the tune of 96 acres of undeveloped land and has started the process of clearing several of those acres in order to put in 5 STVR cabins. But the problem is this legislation would then interrupt the development that has already begun because those cabins will be, at least 2 or 3 of them will be within 500 feet of each other. So even though there are no other homes in the area, well, not close by, this new language would prohibit a current development from taking place. So he's bought the land, he has subdivided it to individual parcels and started building cabins on those parcels and wants them all to be STVRs. That was a point of him purchasing the property and starting the development. So I'm just putting that out there that I understand very much the reason we're doing density caps. I just don't know if that nuance might have been thought of or considered within that density cap. The entire 96 acres is 86 or 96, I don't remember, is R1. So it is being subdivided, but again, it is land separate and apart from other residential areas.
and built to only serve this particular purpose. So just putting that out there as food for thought as we continue to have this conversation. Again, usually at this point is when we determine whether or not we're ready to move forward. And based on the amount of feedback, I'm going to go to the sponsor. Councilman Henderson, what would you like to do, sir? Would you like to move forward in its current form, or would you like to continue this conversation? As a lot of really good feedback, I'm assuming there may be some tweaks we want to consider.
I certainly don't mind.
I'm gonna hit your light.
You could just hit the all call button and we could all talk, but.
No.
So let me address Councilwoman Knowles' concern first. I don't think we'll ever get everybody in compliance. I think they'll always be illegal. I mean, name me a law that everybody is compliant. So I think to try to wait till everybody's compliant, in my opinion, is well, unreasonable, or I don't think we can expect it. Now, we can certainly start dropping the hammer, but there'll always be somebody to figure out how to do an end run or try to fly under the radar. And I get your point. I mean, there's some operating illegal, and really legislation shouldn't be about, we're a legislative body. We're not the enforcement body. We create the legislation and then ask the administration to go enforce it. So keep that in mind. So this is legislation that guides enforcement. Now, to address Councilwoman Hill's comments about meshing the two, at one time I had thought about just taking the legislation that the administration had brought forward through the work of the committee and just confining that to the overlay. Because in respect of the other council members that don't have it in their districts and we're not ready to say, hey, I think you've got a handle on this. I thought, well, why not just take that legislation, confine it to the overlay and move forward, lift the ban or the moratorium so that, you know, it looks like we can create legislation. I got the impression from, and I'll just say the chief of staff, that they wanted to separate the two. They didn't want to do just the overlay and then expand it, you know, more broadly at some point. So that's when I decided, okay, let's keep the overlay, make some tweaks to density and go from there. So with that being said, I certainly don't mind adding any amount of legislation that came from the other piece. I could have supported that one as long as the transfer permit path was available. So I don't really have a problem incorporating some of those other ideas, particularly anything that would address defining the authority of the appeals board or the AHO. I'm not sure that would take a great long while. So if that's something that could be done in a week, if we could have, I guess, this brought back to committee next week with those items in there, I certainly don't have a problem with that. Now, let me say this, and I've heard this phased in approach a couple of times. That's what this piece of legislation is. It is a phased in approach. It doesn't lift the moratorium when we pass this. The moratorium's not lifted to 45 days. One thing, after it becomes effective, like I said, that's after the first full week in April. One thing I learned from Don Loftus when I was on the school board is that work expands to consume time allotted. If we give the administration 45 days, if we give them 60 days, or if we give them 6 months, guess what? That's how long it's going to take to get it up and running. So all I'm trying to do is vote on something when we pass this legislation that is a phased-in approach, that immediately the rules go into play, the fees go in, but we give an extended amount of time to lift the moratorium. Personally, I think 45 days after it becomes effective is a generous amount of time. The people that want to go on with this know a date certain that it's going to happen. Personally, I don't see waiting until June to put this in motion. And by the way, the sooner we start enforcing all this, and sooner we open it up and demonstrate that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, the sooner the other council members that don't have it in their district, I feel like, will start to see, okay, they've got it going on, they know what's happening, and then we can then possibly look at taking this throughout all the districts. So my phased-in approach is 45 days after it becomes, the law becomes effective, which is 2 weeks after second reading, which takes 2 readings, like I said, and then we're going to delay it a week already. So I think I would like to keep the 45 days on there personally, but putting and if we need to add some definitions, and we did add a few definitions in mine that describe absentee and homestay, we can add a few more definitions. I certainly don't mind adding anything that would help define the authority of the appeals board and the AHO. If we need to clean up the language, Chairman, about these transfers being at the review of the board, certainly happy to clean up that language just a little bit. I'll get with Phil on that. But I would like to request having this back in committee next week to address these issues to see if we have it to where we want it. And Councilwoman Dotley, I feel strongly that there needs to be a path for transfer fees. Because I do think that there are situations in the legislation that the administration brought forward, it would not be allowed in any, I'm just going to use the term R1, since that's the term we're most familiar with. It would not be allowed, no new permits in R1 would be permitted in the version that they presented. It would only be permitted in R3 and R4 zones. So I do think that we as Chattanooga need to offer a product that has some R1 in it. I do think there are entirely appropriate places for those R1s to be. Maybe not necessarily in neighborhoods, but my district is pretty rural, and we have streets, we have roads where you're not really connected necessarily as a neighborhood like you might have in St. Elmo. And so there are places there that are appropriate. In trying to create a piece of legislation where one size fits all, you've got to figure out how can we create some wiggle room to allow it where it is appropriate. Now, to me, the best way to do it is to create an appeals board that would hear a case for someone that would say, hey, I'm in the middle of 9 acres. I don't have any. In fact, behind my house, the Littles have, I think it's about 15 acres. They have a short-term vacation rental. They're not in a neighborhood. It's entirely appropriate for them to operate a non-owner occupied short-term vacation. So I think we need to create a path for these R1 permits to transfer in situations that they are entirely appropriate. And the only way that I know to do that is to put it in the hands of living, breathing human beings that can make a decision. So we can put it back in committee next week. We'll try to have all this stuff wrapped up and go from there.
Before we set that time, Chairman, I see your light. Councilwoman Hill, I see you popped on. I did say earlier we're going to have a discussion, then let Mr. Anderson talk. Do you guys want to go first or hear what he may have to say about the proposed legislation?
an idea.
All right, you're up,
So,
Chairman.
thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate what you said about that. That was interesting because it was said once before, if it's good for the city overall, and I kind of don't subscribe to that. The city is very diverse, and where you have a lot of acreage, we have a lot of PUD type developments, a lot of cul-de-sac type developments where R1 exists. But what you said about acreage, really, I would love for you to expand on that when it comes to the appeals board or thinking about that, because that might be the key to trying to figure out.
I think we're limited just to acreage.
Well,
simply
okay.
because there are other places that. and
Yeah,
that's what I say,
think
put-
about that
put it
because,
in the hands of reasonably human beings.
yeah, and I don't disagree with that at all. I love that. But I think you hit on something though that got my brain moving. And because, we don't have that in District 4. We have very tight neighborhoods and a lot of people, remember, the most dense of all 9. And
But yeah, I get it.
so that's where a lot of my opposition to all of this comes from,
Yeah,
is
that's
those
the
tight
reason.
neighborhoods.
I mean, it's hard to design legislation in one size fits all. We're not a one size fits all.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And this is
Okay.
this is a complex issue. And it is, what we have, this legislation. I don't
Yeah.
know any other way.
Okay.
Chairman.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. Thanks for the conversation.
Councilwoman Hill.
I agree 100%. It's complex and I think it's been worth all the time we're spending on it. Just for clarity, next week, I'm going to commit to this body that I will bring that casserole as a separate document. And I'll include a little chart where we can see what's different so that we could have an A and a B. If that's okay with you, Chairman of
Absolutely.
Legislative. Okay.
Mr. Anderson, do you have a few comments you'd like to make on this, sir?
Well, first, I want to know if I can request a specific type of casserole next week from Councilwoman Hill.
As long as it has bacon.
That's good for Councilwoman Knoll. Well, to try and answer some of the questions that were directly put to the administration, as far as reporting back to this body, Councilwoman Hill, I did send you not that long ago in this room, the list I received of currently permitted properties to further our tax discussion from last week about what would happen, what would the impact be to move those properties from a residential tax rate to a commercial tax rate. I can provide that to the rest of the council as well. I do not yet have the listing of all the unpermitted STVRs by district. I will have that to you this week. There's no reason I can't provide that this week. To give you an idea of where the issues are in your specific districts. To go into further information about this, we're eager to move forward. We, the administration, is eager to move forward with the administrative hearing officer as well as the appeals board. Both of those things do take a little bit of time. Even if the appeals board can't act, we see the need for legislation that goes ahead and creates that board and activates them and enables me to recruit people for the board and enables you to ask me, hey, have we filled that board yet on Tuesdays? So we're eager to move forward on those two issues specifically. I would be remiss if I did not remind this council that a majority of the council said you wanted to see at least 3 months of enforcement before you would consider changes to our STVR rules. And because of that, I brought you a 6 months moratorium, which this council passed. We are still operating not on whatever amount of time we're given, but on that 6 month time that the council passed by ordinance. So I can tell you, we will not be ready in April to enforce new rules. There's a lot of talk about enforcement from this council, and rightfully so. But I'm telling you ahead of time, we will not be able to enforce this in April. So if it is passed, that is not on the timeline of the budget amendment that we've prepared or the other things that we have to do. There's a lot that goes into this to get the enforcement that you seek and are entitled to. And I know that you're facing pressure from current operators. Believe me, they have my email address and phone number as well. And I'm hearing from them on a regular basis. They have a priority of getting the moratorium opened as soon as possible so that they can open more units. And I applaud them for operating their businesses and wanting to grow. Our priority is different. Our priority is to do this right. And if it takes a little bit longer and we have to get more input, that's what we want to do. So we are still operating on the 6-month time frame that the council passed. In the meantime, some of the operators have told me, well, my units are just going to sit empty. There's no need for that. There is nothing prohibiting these operators right now from signing leases for 30 days or more, as much as 6 months. We have an affordable housing crisis. There's no reason for a dwelling unit to sit empty in Chattanooga right now. I will gather the other information that council has requested and try to get a bunch of it for you this week. But certainly we'll be prepared to report on whatever specific information you want in this room next Tuesday.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I got a question for Mr. Anderson.
Councilman Henderson.
When we say that we're not going to be ready to enforce anything in April, when are we going to have an administrative hearing officer on board?
We expect to have an administrative hearing officer hired in March.
Okay, but he's not going to be able to start enforcing anything right when he hired on.
The administrative hearing officer is a part-time judicial position that is a few hours a month. Enforcement is done by special commissioned unarmed police officers approved by this council and hired through our HR process. So no, we will not have them in March.
So basically what we're going to do is just shutting down all the illegals without giving those that could come into compliance an opportunity to come into compliance, correct?
I don't understand the question. We didn't shut down anyone. They were operating illegally. We sent them notices at this council's insistence last fall.
My point being, we're not going to give them an opportunity to get compliant until June. I guess they'll have an opportunity if we continue down the path of waiting from March, from March to June. Administrative hearing officer goes on the bench in June and March. But for whatever reason, we're going to wait till June before we open the permit process back up. Correct?
Yes, because that was the will of the majority of this council.
Well, that was because we didn't have this legislation in front of them either. The administration asked for a 6-month extension on the moratorium because we didn't have anything in place. We didn't have any tweaks. We didn't have anything in place to address density, enforcement, yada, yada, yada. And I think it was up to that 6 months. So I guess my question, what I don't understand is why it's going to take March for June for the administrative hearing officer to get up and running and to be doing their job and to start enforcing anything. I mean, just because we're taking applications, does that mean we can't be enforcing anything either? I mean, applications means people are trying to get legal. So if they're legally operating, I'm not sure where the problem there is. It sounds like to me they're going to be legally operating. There shouldn't be a need for the administrative hearing officer to be involved in that. Now, if for some reason that someone is denied a permit, then they're going to have to go to the appeals board to hear that. And I'm not sure that anybody that's operating illegally right now would have an opportunity to go to the appeals board because they don't have anything to appeal. They're out of compliance. So the administrative hearing officer is going to be hearing all of the people that are operating illegally and going to start fining them and telling them to shut down. And those that could get compliant, we're not going to give an opportunity to get compliant. So I guess I don't understand the logic of it. Just doesn't make sense to me. And you don't have to respond. That's just the logic doesn't make sense to me. I agree with a phased in approach. We do need to create a board. We need to create an AHO officer to hear punitive damages. But I think we need to lift the moratorium before June so that we can begin to demonstrate that, yes, we can take applications. Yes, we can process them. They're going to be getting legal. And it's going to give the folks an opportunity that's not operating legally, a chance to get legal. To me, it just makes more sense. So even if we extended it, to 60 days or something, I mean, at some point, we need to demonstrate that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I agree that this body voted on a 6-month moratorium extension because at the time, we didn't have any legislation in front of us. But now we do. And we have an opportunity to lift this moratorium and start putting into place some safeguards. And even if it's, the casserole that Councilwoman Hill is going to bring, I just think we need to come together and get this figured out. And because we've reached some random 6-month date, it doesn't make logical sense to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Hill?
So my understanding of our current state with regard to enforcement is that the way that our ordinance is written now, it goes to court for the $50 fine. That there isn't, they have not been told by us what they need to be doing for enforcement. I feel like that I'm a little disconnected from that. Like, I feel as though my understanding is that we need to pass an ordinance telling them what the rule is so they can enforce that rule with greater efficacy than the current enforcement mechanism, because we haven't put the administrative hearing officer into the legislation. Am I misunderstanding?
Currently, there's no administrative hearing officer in the legislation.
Right. So right now, until this body passes something, and I mean, I'm with you on the urgency. We need to make up our minds and get something passed so that they've got some teeth for, like, even if they had an administrative hearing officer right now, they can't really fully enforce with the oomph that we want until we tell them they can, right?
Yeah, that's what this.
Yeah.
legislation does.
Okay. Because right now, I mean, Dallas stood up and talked to us, I don't know, last week or the week before, that he's got one dude and he'll go out and then maybe then they'll go to court 7 million years later. And so we clearly don't have the assertive enforcement given to the administration yet. I'm with you. I'm like, I want to give it to them. Foam fingers.
Good, Councilwoman?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Seeing no more lights, I think we'll bring this to a close. Councilman Henderson, you asked for this to be discussed again next week. Chairman, I will leave it up to you to determine whether or not that needs to be in committee or a regular agenda session. But I would like to add one request. Councilman Henderson, you addressed everybody's question except mine on the opportunity of somebody that is out in the middle of nowhere that clears some acreage and wants to put in some cabins. Putting in the aspect of density makes sense when we're talking about a lot of our neighborhoods, but maybe not in that case. And you may not have an answer for it now, but I would like to know if there's an opportunity for something like that to be.
Well, so your
Written into
comment,
this.
my original thought is, okay, we can go by parcel. But then when you said they were going to subdivide it, that would sort of do away.
You have to. You can't have a single R1 with multiple houses.
Yeah.
Correct.
Uh,
Just something to think about. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because
No, I thought of it, I mean, when you said they were going to subdivide it, then I had that.
all right, sir. Thank you. Seeing no further lights, we will have one more light.
You would ask a question of me, sir. Both of these back in legislative committee, please.
Legislative next week?
Thank you.
Very good. County, do you have that, ma'am? Great. All right, no further lights. We'll adjourn legislative and be back at 6.
Hey.
That's their problem.
That's,
Sewer runs on the water.
Well, yeah, and one of the questions that they did bring up